requested is that the delegates who wants the projection of the capsule during his or her intervention should it make clear at the moment which he or her wants that the projection being done, so it can be synchronized. Namely, it's now that I will show the capsule, he or she says, and accordingly the projection will be synchronized. Otherwise, people responsible in projecting the capsules would not know at what stage this capsule has to be shown. This is a requirement, please. Thank you. A further gadget which we have, sir, is about these lights. It's like traffic lights. When the green is on, you can go on. When it comes to the red, it's a warning. We don't have the yellow. The green shows that their time is filled. Two minutes to go. It shows that they have 2 minutes to finish their speech according to the ruling which the conference has done yesterday, namely that they are entitled to speak 15 minutes.
Before continuing the general debate, I would also like to mention that it might save us all some time too. If the speaker following the speaker who is on the rostrum would care to take their seat at the front row on my right, your left, it would save time coming from one's seats and can speed up the proceedings very much. So we shall now continue the general debate. The first speaker this morning is the Secretary of Housing and Urbanism of Argentina, His Excellency Mr. M. Vasquez Leona. I invite him to the rostrum at this time.
Señor Secretario General,
Mr. Secretary General, Mr. President, distinguished delegates, may I first of all express the gratitude of my country to the government and people of Canada for the hospitality offered us and for having chosen the particularly beautiful natural scene which the city of Vancouver offers for such an important gathering. Yesterday, in his major address, the Prime Minister, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, recalled the vastness of the range of problems which has brought us here and their close connection with the culture of peoples, which, we might add, must always be respected. We also wish to pay tribute to the Secretary General, Mr. Kurt Waldheim, who quite properly included our effort in the global approach of policy measures agreed to within the framework of the United Nations based on the concept of interdependence. We also congratulate you, Mr. President, on your election to guide our debates. Under your guidance, which we know will be firm and fair, this gathering may come out with proposals for action which will be beneficial to our peoples. Mr. President, we are meeting in this important event because of a deep concern for the threat for the future of mankind and which affects his very existence within the framework in which he has to live and develop his family and social life. This ominous future is nevertheless present already in some parts of the world, while for many regions the problems derived from this is viewed as a passport to the near future. For some, this is already an overwhelming reality. Finally, mankind has become aware of the significance of the accelerated rate of population growth on our planet. What has been called the population explosion is not, nevertheless, the only cause for our sleeplessness and care. Among the many factors which have made the problem of urban settlement so complex, and this complexity is inherent in human nature, there is another explosion, the technological explosion, which, while conceived of to improve the life of man, has, in a parallel manner and profoundly modified the multi-secular way of living at an accelerated pace. We believe it is legitimate to consider that the two factors that have the greatest impact on the item which has brought us together in this beautiful city of Vancouver, because doubtless these two facts together are the main engine for the trend of human migrations, which in a short time has substantially and irreversibly altered the way of life here on Earth. Since the most remote antiquity, the feeling of gregariousness, which is part of human nature, has resulted in varied forms of grouping together and of dwelling settlements. Even nomads is paradoxically a unique form of human settlement, but the erratic nomadic character of early times, which was momentarily stopped when man learned to till the land and undertake static labor, there was a later evolution, which was at first slow and timid toward the cities, which later became an overwhelming torrent of human migrations. It would be redundant to point out that before so highly qualified a gathering, the universal character of this factor, which, including on some occasions, in some cases because of diametrically opposed reasons, occurs equally in the most technologically most advanced countries and those with an agricultural economy. Both contribute to the flow of human settlements to the cities. But it is not as redundant when we note the various aspects of the facts. The picture we see in most places of the world is too well known for me to have to dwell on a description. Its very existence is proof that the origin and essence of the factor which brought it about have not been noted, not only by most of the population, but not even by many who govern. Population growth and urbanization have overflowed not only the unplanned urban structures, but also the very cities which have been planned. The lack of guiding policies for human settlement has brought about a series of needs which determine a quality of life which is characterized by elementary lack of housing and urban social and community services. This lack are felt even more strongly in the poorest sectors. Argentina has, of course, not been an exception. Our country, with an area of more than 3,760,000 square kilometers, has a population which barely exceeds 25 million people. 80% of the population lives in centers of more than 2,000 inhabitants, 64% in cities of more than 25,000, and 36%, almost 9 million, are concentrated in only 7,000 square kilometers, which represents 0.2% of the territory, which is the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires. This urban settlement, which thus becomes the proportionately greatest concentration in the world, represents approximately 50% of the urban population of the entire country. Thus, the province of Santa Cruz in the extreme southern tip of Patagonia has a density of only 0.3 inhabitants per square kilometers, compared with 15,000 in the federal capital. The growth rate of the population is only 1.4%, while that of Latin America is 2.7%, almost double, and the world population growth rate is 2%. Thus, the total population growth of Argentina will, in the year 2000, be 33 million inhabitants, which who, if the present situation is not reversed, will be concentrated in urban areas, preferably in the industrial corridor, which goes through Buenos Aires to Rosario and La Plata, and will make the problem which concerns us even more acute. The most visible effect of this factor was at the beginning an acute shortage of housing. The normal route of internal migrations in Argentina often starts in the countryside and after more or less short stages, going through smaller populations, go to the most important centers, particularly the metropolitan area of the city of Buenos Aires. So it is logical that this effect was felt more acutely in these areas. And thus we can explain that since at the beginning of the century, those who governed Argentina felt the need to facilitate access to adequate housing, and action was concentrated fundamentally in housing for the poorer people. The increase in urban concentration, furthermore, had not attained the present degree, and the infrastructure of public services and community services in general were maintained at levels of quality and efficiency which were worthy of the most advanced countries of the times. But the rate of migrations became more acute after the Second World War. We endeavored to create palliatives, but the most obvious symptoms, the housing shortage, was nevertheless felt because of a lack of adequate planning and lack of infrastructures. In 1965, when we set up the Housing Undersecretariat, we focused on the problem in a part, but did not manage to cover all the aspects of what we now call habitat. Only later were other functions related to urban development added, although we have been able to exert very little influence. Thus, to date, we come with a diagnosis of the situation which we might describe as difficult. The need to improve the quality of life in the home, in the community, in the city, in the region, and in the entire country compels us to commit ourselves to announce objectives which will guarantee adequate standards of living, particularly where shortages are most obvious. We don't wish to tire this conference with figures. However, allow me to give a clear idea of the situation, to point out that with an average family with 4.5 people, the quantitative-qualitative deficit estimated is of more than 2 million units, which means that more than 35% of the total population of the country lacks adequate housing, or in other words, that more than 1 out of 3 families faces this problem. The government I represent and the entire nation are today determined to reverse the situation. To this end, we have not only our unflagging will, but also with the indispensable tools. In the Secretariat of Housing and Urbanism, within the framework of the Ministry for Social Welfare, we are carrying out a rapid transformation which will make it possible to focus our action on 3 fundamental objectives: the formulation and implementation of policies for urban development and housing, encouragement of technological research, and promoting the regional planning bodies and provincial housing institutes. The first of these 3 objectives, the implementation of which we hope to achieve within this year, will make it possible, in adequate coordination with the remaining ministries of our government, to enact not only the basic legal rules necessary to regulate human settlements throughout the country, but also to implement infra-services, public, social, and community services, which are essential to transform these policies into reality at the service of man, his family, and the community. The housing policy will in turn make it possible to bring order into the entire system, both in relation with the private and the public sectors, and thus channeling the support of the first toward the needier families without thereby overlooking the necessary encouragement to private endeavors. The encouragement of technological research, which is the second objective, is intended in particular to radically alter the present building procedures so that without declining quality and with the necessary minimum requirements for our times, we will manage to lower the costs and in particular to shorten the time needed for construction with a consequent reduction of financial burdens and a recycling of resources. In the public sector in Argentina, we're now building 215,000 housing units, and in the course of this year we will have built 60,000 additional units by traditional means. If we take into account the extent of our country, our federal regime of government, and the imbalance of our regional development, it will be clearly understood why we have a third objective: to promote action by regional planning bodies and the provincial housing institutes. We emphasize in particular strengthening of the federal system by firm support to the institutions in the 22 provinces and the territories of Tierra del Fuego, Antarctica, and the islands of the South Atlantic as the only means to promote their harmonious development. Hence, the implementation of the housing and development programs must be exclusively under the jurisdiction of the competent local bodies. None of this would be possible if we did not have an organization to finance the implementation of these programs. The Ministry of Social Welfare of Argentina has and controls the institution which can meet this requirement through the Secretariat of Housing and Urbanism. The Banco Hipotecario Nacional, which I have the honor to be the president of, is the oldest banking institution in our country. It was established in 1886 and throughout its prestigious history has become the governing body in financing housing. Today, almost 90 years later, it is undergoing a process of renewal which includes a change in its organic charter. Its new legal status will make it possible for us to intensify financial action in the public sector and support the private sector, including loan and saving institutions over which we shall exercise supervision. We also have financed infrastructure works which are inherent in an integrated urban development, and as in the past, the operations will be based essentially in savings capability by issuing bonds which will increase the prestige of the bank not only in our country but also abroad, since these bonds were successfully quoted in several foreign exchange markets. Social dynamics always creates new problems, new ideas, and new solutions. The deterioration of the environment is today one of the dominant concerns throughout the world, not only in the metropolis and megalopolis, but throughout the entire planet. Contamination of the seas by oil, radioactive waste, etc., and the atmosphere because of combustion, nuclear testing, and industry. The anxious expectation for new horizons, when attained, only serves to discover more distant expectations. Under the pressure of migrations and the vegetative growth, our cities are becoming more dense and larger. This compels us to promote the balanced development of the regions where cities are located as the only alternative for those who seek a better quality of life. The balanced development of regions will in turn make possible a rational urban localization, thus avoiding violent contrasts between the empty internal spaces and the large urban groupings. Promoting human settlements through local production brings man closer to the land, and the more self-sufficient he is, he will tend to balance the polarization in metropolitan areas. Although our country is characterized by the existence of regions with a low population density, this does not mean that we should not take steps to maintain the proportion of arable land intact so as to meet the growing demand for food. Thus, we are carrying out ecological studies so as to achieve a more rational utilization of arable lands. The Republic of Argentina is attentively following the progress of the idea which led to this conference and the concrete efforts to bring our goals to completion. And we consider that to bring about better living is a beautiful ideal which must become the reality of the future. The spiritual and human benefits to be derived from the evaluated projects at this conference will increase the universal heritage in the broader sense, which includes, above all, intellectual and moral values. We must strengthen this common endeavor with the encouragement which will doubtless result from the combination of old and profound cultures, the contact of complementary temperaments and traditions, by conquering the forces of nature which have added to the wealth and beauty of our lands, and the advances achieved over ignorance and error from culture, science, and spiritual life, which is the contribution of all of us who come to this conference. We cannot proceed to further stages without greater effort. Nevertheless, the results achieved and underway cause us to trust that this conference will complete its work successfully. Thank you.
I wish to thank the Secretary of Housing and Urbanism of Argentina. I might point out to distinguished delegates that our call on technology has failed us initially. The lighting system did not work. It will work in the future, and I'm sure all will respect the time limits. I might also point out before calling on the next speaker that the following speaker will be led to a seat in front of the rostrum by a conference officer to save the time of the conference in people moving out of seats and up to the rostrum. It's now my great pleasure to give the floor to the Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development of the United States of America, Her Excellency Mrs. Carla A. Hills.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, most distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States has sent me here committed to a constructive and cooperative role in these discussions and to help bring about that enduring spirit of peaceful and global habitat to which this international assemblage is dedicated. President Ford gave me a message before I left Washington, and I am happy to read it to you. Your conference will focus world attention on a challenge which confronts us all: how to enhance human dignity in the villages, towns, and cities where people live. It is an imposing task. It will take all the imagination, determination, perseverance that people and their governments can summon. In a few weeks, the United States will celebrate a great milestone in its history, the 200th anniversary of American independence. This will serve as an occasion for pondering the lessons of 2 centuries of experience, of the successes and the failures, and how we may all benefit from them as we contemplate our future. In this sense, the Conference on Human Settlements, which is intended to make possible a global exchange of experience, comes at an especially appropriate time for us Americans. Our history is a reflection of other peoples in other places. Throughout our existence as a nation, we have been enriched by ideas brought to our shores by millions of immigrants from all parts of the globe, and by those who did not stay, but whose ideas left an enduring impression upon our lives and our human settlements. The conference will provide us with yet another means by which we can benefit from the wealth of experience of others and add new dimensions to our vision of our next 100 years. There is no task more compelling than the improvement of man's condition. The recommendations you make could have a profound and lasting influence on all of us. The United States will cooperate with you in seeking to chart paths that offer the promise of better and fuller lives for all people and habitats truly worthy of man. Signed, Gerald R. Ford. As we search for the key of what President Ford calls habitats worthy of man, we must keep in mind that we will be judged not so much on our skills in the arena of world politics, but in our willingness to lay aside debates that divide us and concentrate on the greater needs that have brought us here in the first place. Habitat is a creative challenge, since it is certain that our often sterile and too often rigid thinking of the past will not serve the awesome needs of the future. This conference demands a radical change in the entire perspective of human settlements. Above all, it calls for a long-range, comprehensive approach to the problems and opportunities of human settlements, rather than dealing separately and short-range with each contributing factor. We are here because we have much to learn from each other, much to take back with us for possible application to similar national problems of our own. For although the numbers and the problems are global, unifying us in a resolve, the choice of action by the nations here assembled will be defined in the long run by national application dictated by local needs, local economics, local customs, and local experience. The experience of my country is set against the backdrop of our fundamental belief in a free society in which the establishment of public policy is based on the active participation and involvement of all citizens. It is the combined voice and force of all of our citizens, representing all sides and all aspects of the question of human settlements, which provides our national government with the critical information and judgment essential to balancing the opposing forces of inevitable growth and finite resources while responding to our needs. Never has the flexibility of our national institutions been more challenged than by our experience in urbanization. In the space of less than 100 years, we have moved from a sparse agrarian society to a crowded urban society. In the process, we have experimented with hundreds of programs and literally thousands of institutional arrangements to deal with this change. Both our mistakes and our triumphs have been highly visible to us and to the rest of the world, and offer a laboratory of hard lessons to other nations at this conference, now and long after Habitat has been adjourned. We are here to share the knowledge we derive from the approaches we have tried, both those that have worked and those that have failed. For example, we know now that in spite of the support of urbanists and government officials, in spite of noble intentions and hard work, and in spite of public and private financing, wholesale urban renewal can destroy the culture, the spirit, and the social fabric of an urban neighborhood. We learned by that mistake, and now, rather than by clearing them out, uprooting the residents, and rebuilding the neighborhood from the ground up, we are reclaiming our center cities by preserving and restoring and adding. With resources so scarce, we must be creative in the reuse of every existing and serviceable resource that remains in the neighborhood larder. As a nation of the world, our experience and our lessons cannot be isolated from global experience. Indeed, the discovery and development of the Western Hemisphere and the establishment of my country was part of that global experience. Today, as the rapid shrinking of our planetary habitat affirms the naivety of some of our past concepts, we must concede that no nation's growth and development can be insulated from the global economy, nor from the necessity of positive international cooperation of the kind we are engaged in right here. For sound national planning benefits the entire world community, and cooperative international efforts augment the effectiveness of national programs. We cannot shirk our obligations as world citizens to the need of the many poor people and poor nations among us. Together we do have the technical ability to provide a suitable quality of life for every living member of the human race today. The question is of our moral commitment to the oldest quest of humanity, a world without poverty. It is clear that the increasing numbers of human beings in settlements, resulting both from high birth rates and migration, critically complicates the task of providing a higher quality of life for each and calls for a rededication of the World Population Plan of Action adopted almost unanimously in Bucharest in 1974 and now is being implemented in many parts of the world. It is also clear that we cannot achieve a world without poverty without the establishment of an expanding world economy. Good intentions alone will not turn the magic key. We cannot accomplish it with a one-way flow of funds from the richer nations to the poorer nations, a method tried and found wanting, both by the nations who bore the heavy burden and by those who have felt their national pride compromised by a relationship of continued dependency on the goodwill of others. Thus, we bring to this conference a number of practical international programs tempered by our national experience and faithful to the fundamental beliefs of the American people, particularly responding to the expressed concerns of the developing nations. The United States emphasizes 4 areas of priorities and programs to assist those countries: food production, distribution, and nutrition, population planning and health, education, and human resources. Each of these is essential to the establishment of human settlements policy, but until now, we have tended to deal with them individually. Habitat itself is a comprehensive approach to the human settlement, reinforces our national determination to effect changes in some of our assistance programs. First, to achieve improved rural-urban balance, we are developing new integrated and comprehensive approaches to help nations who wish to strengthen their rural regions. This would focus on the development of market towns as an alternative to the boundless growth of single urban centers. It is aimed at increase of agricultural production and with it, the sound development of rural regions. Second, we are turning to a more comprehensive approach to providing shelter for the urban poor. One of our most important instruments for this is our Housing Investment Guarantee Program, which has financed more than $1 billion of shelter projects and which is now the largest single source of international financing for shelter. At its inception, this was a program for those of moderate income. We are shifting that emphasis to meet the needs of the poor. The Housing Investment Guarantee Program will be used increasingly to assist the poor to help themselves in 2 ways: by financing sites and services for those who build or complete their own housing, and by financing the improvement of slum and squatter settlements to provide better living conditions. Third, we will support the integration of major development components, appropriate technology and credit for small producers, family planning, health, nutrition, and education, so that the programs will provide better opportunities for the poor to expand their income and gain easier access to these services they need. Fourth, in technology, last month at the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, Secretary Kissinger outlined the most comprehensive effort ever put forward by the United States to deal with the application of technology to development. Many of the programs have important relevance to human settlements activities. Satellite technology offers enormous promise as an instrument for development and human settlements planning. Remote sensing satellites can be used to collect data on land use, soil types, transportation, and demographic patterns. Modern communications technology, including satellites, have a large untapped potential to improve education, training, health services, and food production. Obviously, since every nation is different, all of our scientific advances will not be appropriate to all nations. But we offer access to the technologies which help the United States in managing our urban and rural environment, both as an insight to our national experience and as evidence of our desire to share our accumulation of knowledge with developing countries whose urban growth has already outpaced our own. And few subjects are more central to the improvement of our habitats than the utilization of water resources. The technology of storing, transporting, and purifying water is fundamental to the health and even the survival of human settlements. In addition, the United States will encourage its universities, institutes, and training centers to establish special programs for students and personnel of developing nations in business, industrial problems, public management, health, welfare, and related socio-economic fields. My government will encourage the formation of a technology corps to parallel our Executive Service Corps to work with and help train local officials in the new and complex problems of human settlement management. And we are committed to expanding the capability of the United Nations International Center for the Exchange of Technological Information. To that end, the United States has already moved to improve the center's access to the existing information centers of our country. My government offers this conference and the nations of the world the best of what we have to contribute, not out of charity, nor a sense of beholden indebtedness. The resources of the world, wherever located, are vital to all of us, as is the world economy by which we all must live. At the 7th Special Session of the United Nations last September, our nations agreed on an agenda of mutual international action. Since that time,
first,
I regret to interrupt the distinguished Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, but we are attempting to keep to a rigid time schedule and the light schedule, which will apply to all delegates, and I would appreciate...
Excuse me, Mr.
remarks
President,
being
I'll
granted
just
in.
conclude my remarks.
Thank you very much.
We are all committed to a common success, and I thank you very much.
Not always consistent in themselves. With other words, there are recommendations
I regret that the able and distinguished and attractive delegate of the United States of America was the first to fall victim to the chairman's gavel, but I'm sure that she appreciates the need to remain within the rules of the conference. But I thank her for her remarks. The next speaker is the Minister of Housing and Urban Development of Iran, His Excellency Humayun Jaberi Ansari. I give him the floor at this time.
Therefore, I should like to propose to insert a preamble in document A/conference 70/5, reading
Mr. President,
the recommendations
distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen,
in accordance with
it's with pleasure that we are participating in this distinguished and historic gathering, and I would like to begin by conveying to you the message of His Imperial Majesty, the Shahanshah Aryameh, our great leader. Quote, our present century is marked by man's supreme accomplishments in the domains of industry, science, and technology. But we have at the same time witnessed on an enormous scale the despoliation of nature, the waste of natural resources, and the degradation of quality of life in human settlements. We are now standing at a critical juncture in the history of mankind, a time for bold decisions and a time for action on a massive scale and at the international level. The more urgent threat to the survival of our people who live in the rural or urban areas of this planet is not posed by the danger of a nuclear holocaust, but by the rapidly deteriorating quality of life in our settlements and the inability to house a growing population. Technological progress and economic growth will remain the indispensable instrument for the attainment of a higher material standard of life. But these instruments must be employed judiciously if they are to solve the numerous socio-economic and physical problems of our cities, towns, and villages. We believe that the nations of the world can effectively muster adequate resources, energy, and technology to overcome the monumental problem of improving the conditions of living in existing human settlements and of building new communities for future generations. The time has arrived to make a commitment. We hope that Habitat, the United Nations Conference on Human Settlements, will formulate appropriate and practical guidelines to be pursued by nations individually and by world community collectively for the creation of a better living environment for the present and future population of our planet, end quote.
I'd like to thank the representative of Austria for
The government of Iran, under the far-sighted leadership of His Imperial Majesty, the Shah Arian Mehr, is determined to act in cooperation with other nations in a global effort to ameliorate the deteriorating quality of life on our planet. This is the hope of our ancient civilization and the aspiration of our present generation. It is the living environment of the future that concerns us today. The problems of human settlements cannot be divorced from issues of population growth, economic development, and the environment. While the solutions may differ from one culture or nation to another, the general direction of our search for practical solutions should be based on a comprehensive strategy embracing all these elements simultaneously.
Norway stated that
World population, especially in the developing countries, is growing at a high rate. Unprecedented in the history of mankind, the cities of the developing world are troubled by congestion, population, and lack of amenities, and yet these urban agglomerations in most cases are the major vehicle for rapid economic development, which promises better living standards for all. The problems of human settlements confronting us today are not comparable to any existing
this involves shelter,
experiences known to world civilization before. We face the monumental task of housing 3.5 billion people within the next 3 decades,
in a sequence of
not to mention the problems of providing
points out how the objective can be achieved.
housing and basic services for the world's existing population. The problem, however, is not merely confined to these fields. The issues involved are far more complex. The world is going through a process of change and evolution in which old concepts are discarded and established beliefs shattered. Contemporary society is geared to high-level technology with all its problems. Living in a finite space, modern man faces growing population pressure, depletion of natural resources, pollution of living environments, and the spread of a culture of higher expectations. Yet, his biological and spiritual needs have changed little, if at all, through the ages. The history of mankind's development and progress is filled with examples of achievements in increasing productivity, harnessing energy, combating disease, and employing advanced technology to better the lives of millions. But we have yet to offer a plan for improving these qualities of life, which are not easily measurable. Potentially, we have the resources and the technology to provide people with food, clothing, shelter, but we have not devised the means for giving them dignity, privacy, and freedom of action. Admittedly, we have a much larger population to plan for and many more complicated problems to solve than at any other time in our history. The solutions are not always easy to find, and the prescriptions not always easy to follow. Nevertheless, it is again the nature of human being to seek better solutions even if the problems involved seem insoluble. We have already discussed the problems of growth and spatial development within the context of Iranian society at some length in our national paper. While our experience illuminates many of the problems facing the entire world community, it may not be typical. I would therefore like to outline the major problems of development as it relates to human settlements on a more general level and propose areas in which international cooperation could assist in the search for solutions. I will begin by describing certain problems which, whether we like it or not, do exist. And the sooner we begin to appreciate them, the closer we will get to discovering appropriate solutions. The first problem is that the world population will continue to increase at a high rate regardless of our population control measures. The second is the finite amount of available space and resources existing on our planet. The third is the slow process of redistribution of income in the world, making it impossible to solve the problem of housing through the market mechanism. The fourth is the difficult problem of mobilizing technical and managerial resources towards housing construction, urban development, and rural reconstruction in view of the scarcity of these resources throughout the world. The problems we are facing in the world today as related to the quality of life as well as materialistic living standards in our human settlements are the direct results of the basic realities of our time and the limitations imposed by the conditions and characteristics of certain processes and structures. I would like to attempt to describe briefly the major problems facing the human settlements at the world level. Considering the reality of ineffective population control measures, at least in the short run, the redistribution of population within national boundaries is the most crucial problem over the next 2 to 3 decades. This requires clear and forceful socioeconomic and spatial strategies at national, regional, urban, and rural levels. Since the redistribution of population requires the redistribution of economic activities and the redirection and relocation of public and private investment, its importance and significance in the economic life of nations cannot be questioned. Urbanization, which can be employed as a mechanism for redistribution of population, should therefore be regulated to achieve the desired pattern of redistribution. Regulating such a process is not an easy task, but the natural course of its progress is so strong and overwhelming that any attempt to reverse it would not improve our chances of finding practical and realistic solutions to problems created by it. Urbanization, either with or without industrialization, is a phenomenon of the 20th century, and for the next 3 decades and sometime beyond will be the most powerful vehicle for spatial as well as socioeconomic change. I do not intend to take up the precious time of this distinguished gathering by mentioning all the problems associated with the urbanization. They are too numerous and already too familiar to you. I would just like to say that a sound national urbanization policy is an indispensable element not only for guiding the process of urbanization, but also as a response to a number of direct and indirect consequences of this process. Housing, or the problem of providing basic habitat for the world's population, as it relates both to individuals and to the nations or societies as a whole, is probably the most tangible problem confronting the world. In the area of housing standards, for instance, we believe that nations should develop their own standards on the basis of their traditions, value systems, and economic possibilities. The major concern of all governments is the quality of life and the living environment in the rural areas, while the process of urbanization is gradually reversing the percentage distribution of population between rural and urban sectors in favor of the latter. For years to come, millions of people will be living in rural settlements where their social and economic needs should be satisfied. The problem of land, its availability for urban use, and its imperfect speculative market is so important that it requires special attention. And again, in this area, the experience of various nations in dealing with this problem could be valued to others. In general, we believe that land is a finite commodity due to serve competition among the users whose numbers increase over the time. It is also scarce commodity. Like any other scarce commodity, its use should be optimized. We also believe that land is for consumption and not for trade or speculation. I will not elaborate further on these points, since we will be discussing these crucial issues during the course of our deliberations, except to conclude my remarks by outlining the areas in which my government finds the cooperative efforts of number of states of the United Nations fruitful. We believe Our approach to all these problems in view of the basic realities of our time should be basically realistic and practical. We strongly believe that this conference should not help to raise the expectations of the people all over the world without devising the means to respond to them. In the area of transfer of technology, we believe that this conference should be active and create the foundation for a continuous effort on the part of all member states to facilitate the transfer of technology, know-how to places where they are needed. Another important contribution to this conference could make would be to play a role in setting up mechanisms for institution building purposes, including training and research. We also hope that the conference will recommend mechanisms through which existing world financial institutions might fund spatial development and housing programs throughout the world. My delegation and myself look forward to participating in the deliberations of this conference with the hope of seeking solutions to the complex problem of human settlements in a positive and constructive spirit of international cooperation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the Minister of Housing and Urban Development of Iran. But before calling on the next speaker, I should like to remind the participants that in accordance with the decision of the conference, the list of speakers in the general debate will be closed at 6 p.m. today. Those wishing to participate but who have not inscribed themselves on the list are requested to do so as soon as possible. Perhaps I could also remind distinguished delegates that the translators sometimes require that the pacing of the interventions be such so that they can be properly translated to the audience. I should point out that if it is not possible to complete your remarks in the time allocated, and I must enforce the rules, that the completion of your remarks, your total remarks, will appear in written form in the conference records. It's now my pleasure to give the floor to the Minister of State for External Affairs of Canada, His Excellency the Honourable Alan J. McEachen.
Mr. President, Habitat imprimerà une direction nouvelle aux
will give a new direction to the new aspirations of human community. A conference such as ours, which deals with socio-economic questions which affect all of mankind, constitutes a new phenomenon in international life. We're seeking greater equality and more justice among nations and individuals. The quest has become more urgent than ever in the aftermath of decolonization, the affirmation of human rights, and the progress of modern technology and communications. Habitat goes back to a proposal made by Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Muchas gracias al señor delegado de Noruega.
I thank the representative of Norway for his very relevant comments.
We were
And we hope
convinced
that later, when we go into this in
equality of
detail, we
environment
can incorporate his remarks into our
could not be
document.
disassociated from human life.
I would like to make a clarification of a general nature.
Since then,
In
the
accordance
international community
with the rules of
has
procedure for
driven
international conferences,
to attack the other
which
fundamental
ours is one, all
problems
actions,
of the
all
human
recommendations for
condition
national
on our
action,
planet.
which will be the objective of this committee, have to be
settlements
consistent
will be
with
expected,
the social
as Barbara
and
Ward
political
has
systems
said,
of states,
to address the most vital and urgent needs of the
so
millions
that in the document
of human beings
there
who
is
are living
no intention and
and
there will
dying
be no
in
intention
conditions
of
that can only
disregarding
be
such a
described as
fundamental
inhuman.
fact. The representative of the
It
United
will
Kingdom
aim
has
at
the floor.
mobilizing the necessary spirit of cooperation and political will,
Thank you,
and
Mr.
at
Chairman.
establishing innovative
The
forms
United
of sharing
Kingdom
knowledge,
delegation supports generally
experience, and essential
the
ways and
introductory
means
statements
towards more
and
effective
indeed all the
national
29
and
recommendations
international
which
action.
are to be considered in
Canada
time by this committee,
endorses the
and we would
fundamental
certainly like to
recommendation
congratulate
before the
the
conference
Secretariat
that
and
national
the
governments should
preparatory
establish a
committee
human
for the way
settlement
they have
policy
drawn up these very
as an essential
detailed
component of an overall
recommendations.
national strategy of socio-economic
The United Kingdom delegation
development.
has submitted 5
This
amendments,
proposition, it seems to us,
which
is
we
valid
hope will serve
regardless
to
of the political
clarify
ideology
and
the
make
development
more
of the country
coherent
concerned.
the main issues
Past
in each
improvements in
of
living
the recommendations
have been
concerned.
seen as a consequence
But we
of
would hope,
development.
Mr. Chairman, that
I believe that this
our
conference
suggestions
will
here
recognize and
and
proclaim
others coming
that the
from
creation
other
of
distinguished
adequate
delegates
living conditions,
could be
building
circulated
of
to
better
the
settlements
delegates
are the
so that we
basic
can discuss
foundation
them.
of
We
any
have them in
real,
front of us
meaningful
while we
development.
discuss them. I understand that the
developing a human
written
settlement
submissions,
policy,
the written amendments
Canada
already
must
made
take into
are not with
account
us
a
at the
number of
moment.
factors and circumstances
Our
peculiar
amendments
to our own situation.
are really to confirm
First,
our support
unlike most of the
for
participants
the
in
recommendations.
conference, which are unitary
May I
states,
observe that this
Canada
committee will be
is a
dealing
federation.
with the
Several
details
levels of government,
and the
federal,
product
provincial,
part
territorial,
of the
and
habitat.
municipal, all have
This is surely the more
significant
human part.
responsibilities for human
In
settlement.
this section, we will be dealing with
Coherent
what
and
people
effective
see,
human
what they
settlement
feel,
policies in
what they
Canada
touch and use.
can only be achieved through
And then in section
intergovernmental
D,
cooperation.
with the land on which they
The Habitat
stand.
Conference will no doubt further encourage national debate and intergovernmental consultation in the field of human settlement and stimulate in particular the further development of national, provincial, and metropolitan land use policies. Secondly, we believe that settlement policies and strategies should focus on the problems of growth and decline. That is to say, on the improvement of the quality of life in larger human settlements and the maintenance of a vital community life in smaller towns and villages and in rural settlements. In Canada, as in many other countries, we are faced with an increasing concentration of population growth in a few large cities and metropolitan areas, such as Edmonton, Calgary, Toronto, and Vancouver. The frequent result of rapid growth has been sprawl, loss of the best farmland, and too often substandard living conditions. Concurrently, many of our smaller towns and rural areas have remained static or have declined, losing many of their most productive people to the big cities. Thirdly, while the major portion of our population growth is the result of natural increase, immigration plays a critical role in shaping the growth of Canadian human settlements. With the sharp decline in our birth rate, immigration is becoming even more important. Fourthly, one of the objectives of human settlement policies in Canada must be to overcome the major differences in the economic conditions and the quality of life enjoyed by Canadians in different parts of the country. Our human settlements must be able to offer to our citizens in various parts of the country comparable, if not equivalent, employment, housing, education, health, and other basic facilities. Fifthly, resource conservation will be one of the key factors shaping future Canadian human settlements. We are terribly concerned with the urban despoliation of some of Canada's best farmland. This resource is irreplaceable and requires a more responsible stewardship, and we are determined to rehabilitate our existing built environment. Canadians have learned that the costs of indiscriminate demolition and redevelopment are too heavy both in economic and in human terms. We also are beginning to recognize how better settlement can effect major reductions in our rate of energy consumption. Energy conservation in human settlements will have to play the major role in achieving my government's target of reducing the annual growth in Canada's energy consumption from its current 5.5% to 3.5% by 1985. The Canadian government wishes, in the context of habitat, to underline the special needs, aspirations, and rights of our Indigenous population. Many aspects of the distinctive cultures, and lifestyles of Canada's native peoples, such as a strong attachment to the land and its resources, the sharing of community wealth, and a strong sense of community life, are particularly relevant to the concerns of habitat. Canada has provided support to allow its native groups to develop political strength and to articulate their grievances and their aspirations. Our respect for the traditions, culture, and special needs of Canada's native people does not imply any restrictions in the freedom of individuals to participate fully in Canadian society. Finally, we believe that it is highly desirable, indeed essential, to involve the business community, citizens groups, and the public at large in the planning and implementation of human settlement policies. The ultimate test of whether our human settlements are good is whether they are congenial to those who live in them. Out of the process of intergovernmental cooperation and public involvement, there is emerging in Canada the recognition that future settlement policies must emphasize the reduction of waste and the importance of conservation of energy, of prime agricultural land, and of the natural and the built environment. To illustrate this point, I should like to show a capsule version of one of our audiovisual presentations concerned with new and more environmentally appropriate designs for Canadian human settlements.